Welcome back to the Silent Plus podcast, and I'm going to let Casey Dunaway take over.
There we go.
Straight in front of me we have
John Nicholson.
and to my left,
Josh Watford.
She knows how this thing works. Yeah. That's great.
We told her
we're become predictable, Josh. I mean, that's part of the problem. Right?
Yeah, I know. Well, the thing is, I was trying to be unpredictable then.
Way to go.
And, but Casey just picked it up. I was going to throw her under the bus or right from the get-go.
We are glad you're here, though.
Well,
yeah.
thanks.
And well done.
Sometimes we come to her office and record these podcasts, and sometimes she actually has work to do.
Right.
And
Like
John
today.
and I are just wanting to goof around and talk.
Exactly.
And so we basically kidnap her in her own office. We shut the door and,
expect me
include
to
her
know what to
in on
say in
this.
these podcasts.
Yep. So, we've
Well, that's as if you would expect us to know what to say in these podcasts.
I know what I do.
That's where I was going with that, John. It's almost as if we already have all this planned out,
Right.
and Casey thinks that she doesn't.
I tell you, if
And
people were just really tuned in to how extensive our pre-show prep is, they would be truly amazed, I think.
I think our 3 minutes today was the longest on record.
there,
Giving away our secrets.
there will
Those
be
are trade secrets here.
podcast guru books written
Absolutely.
on how we do all this. I'm sure.
Anyway, all right.
Yeah. Enough banter. Here we go. All right. So we are talking about taking our shoes off.
All right.
And I know some little boys who do not need to take their shoes off around me.
I know some grown men who don't need to.
Well, yeah, that too. I may be included in that, but so obviously we're not talking about taking our shoes off, getting comfortable. We're not talking about taking our shoes off and grounding as the New Age practice goes. We have talked about often go touch grass, and
Right.
sometimes it's just good to touch grass with your feet and all that. But we're not talking about grounding ourselves with Mother Earth and stuff like that. There is a clear biblical precedent for taking our shoes off on holy ground.
Yes.
And so I guess now that I've talked about what you don't mean by taking your shoes off, why don't you help us understand what you do mean by taking your shoes off? Even though you already talked about it on Sunday.
That's okay. And that's the purpose
there may
of
be
this.
some people listening who were unable to tune into that particular message.
Right, and just as a side note, if you ever want to, you can find our website or on our app and find those sermons that are archived there, and you can go back and listen to them if you're interested. But this whole issue of taking our shoes off, it reaches back to the story in Exodus 3 with Moses when he encounters the burning bush, and God says to him, take off your shoes for you're standing on holy ground.
Yeah.
And there's probably more significance to it than I would be aware of along the way, but I think the point of it is that this is a different moment. We need to treat this differently. We need to have a different kind of awareness. And it's like, just to bring this kind of back down to reality where we live, when you take your shoes off, you're a little more aware of where you're stepping.
Mm-hmm.
Sharp things, you want to avoid those.
I've stepped on some Legos before.
There you go. Yeah, that's right. So it changes. It changes your perception. It changes your awareness, and I think that's what God is saying to Moses in that moment. There's something happening here, and up until this moment, you may not have been aware of it, but now you are aware of it. So you need to change how you're approaching this. And I think that's a lesson for all of us, because the reality is, truly, every place we step is holy.
Yeah.
And so we need to change how we approach that, because I think most people, self-included, for a long, long time, and even a lot of times now, I'm not conscious of the wonder of creation that is around, and there's oxygen for me to breathe.
Yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
And, all of it's a gift.
So you would say that your sermon was less about taking your physical shoes off and more of your spiritual shoes off.
Yeah, but I think sometimes taking the physical shoes off helps us. I mean, it's like postures in prayer.
Yeah.
But yes,
But
to your point, yes.
Where I'm going with this, John, is our false dichotomy of body and spirit, right?
Yeah.
We've talked extensively about this. That we.
I don't know that we can talk enough about it because we're
Right.
so caught up in it.
I agree.
Culturally.
We, and when I say we, I mean just humans in general, broken, fallen, sinful humans have separated falsely the spirit and the body. And we say that we don't need to do things with our body to affect our spirit, and things that we do in our spirit doesn't affect our body, and that's just not true.
Right.
And so, yeah, I would say this is probably a both and, even though, taking off the shoes of your mind and your heart, so to speak, to be able to experience the holy in every single aspect is, probably the thrust of the whole thing.
Yeah, and just increasing awareness. When's the last time you took your shoes off outside? Casey?
Over the weekend.
Okay, you running around barefooted over the weekend. Good
Trying to get Lala outside while she's sick.
Okay. Oh, so you have her outside barefooted while she's sick?
She wasn't barefoot, I was.
Okay. And now you're sick, right?
From sneezing
Okay.
in my face, yes.
No, I'm kidding. Giving you a hard time. Well, that's cool. Because I really, honestly can't tell you the last time I was barefooted outside. I don't do that often.
No, I'm scared of getting parasites in my feet, so I don't do it often either.
There's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I'm worried about hookworms from my dog, because she's had hookworms before, and I've tried to. That's a whole other story.
let's
I've tried to clean that up.
Gotcha.
But you never know.
Let's keep this PG. That's all right. But yeah, it's not so much about that. It is about an awareness of the world in which we live. So we've been on this. Do you look at stars any differently now?
Yeah.
Tell us why.
Well, trying to get Lala more involved in what creation looks like and who made it and how it is something that we do take for granted. We take our outdoor cushions and we lay them on the ground and we look up at the stars. And I know nothing about constellations, but I am learning now so I can teach her, because it is something that we take for granted.
Has it changed how you look at the sky?
Yeah, it's more of amazement now. It's sitting there in awe that somebody made this for us to look at all the time, to guide us, to see his creative ability that he put forth for us to enjoy.
And I think that's so much it. And just naming a constellation, all of a sudden, I've got a reference point in the sky to start looking at other things.
Yep.
Or naming a flower. I know what that is. Yesterday, our neighbor, the house next door, has all kinds of varieties of camellia, and I went and gathered because they're in full bloom right now. And it's just amazing the variety. They're all camellias, but they're deep red to light pink to white, and some of them have double, even triple blossom. But it's just an amazing part of God's creative work of creating all this variety. And a lot of folks just miss it. They're just blind to it. And I think approaching life, if you will, with our shoes off, recognizing that this is a holy place, it heightens our awareness. We begin looking for it instead of just passing blindly by it.
Well, and I think we talked on the last podcast about naming things.
Yes.
And that helping me, I don't know if it helps anybody else, but it helps me live in wonder.
Yeah.
Because if I can recognize something, I feel like I can better appreciate it. If it's just a weed, if it's just a flower, then it's just that. But wow, that's
just so you know, a weed by definition is a plant growing someplace you don't want it to grow.
I mean, there's good things to recognize, like poison ivy.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
So
good
keep
to
your
know
shoes
those
on.
things. Yes.
Keep your shoes on in that sense. So here's, I hope this isn't too like down a rabbit hole, but the iPhone has a new update where you can take a picture of something.
Okay.
This is a self-described weed. All right. I know y'all can't see this, but it's a little flower out at the golf course at NMI. And what you can do, you can take a picture of it. Y'all can try this at home, and then go to the picture in your photos and swipe up. And there's a whole bunch of info that comes up with it about the actual picture itself. But they've added an update where it'll have a look up and then whatever it is in the picture. All right, so it identifies.
So what kind of weed is that?
That is a shepherd's purse.
Okay.
And then you can click on shepherd's purse, and it gives you a whole bunch of web results and other pictures of whatever it is.
Okay, you're creating all kinds of cognitive dissonance for me, because here I am. I made the statement Sunday, and it's a statement that it was really an unplanned statement, but it's got a lot of traction, that there would be no screens in heaven.
Yep.
And here you are pointing me. I'm an Android user, just for the record, so I don't have that. But here you are telling me to go use my screen to interact with God's creation.
To not just interact, but to help you appreciate God's creation.
And this is this wonderful
and
tension with technology for us.
Right. And so I think if technology is the mediator for wonder, not the object of wonder, because I'm not wondering over the shepherd's purse that I'm looking at in the picture.
Right.
It's the actual one I'm holding in my hand.
Yeah.
I think that's an appropriate use of that.
I think so as well. Just give you another example of that I caught, because I was an observer. I was playing with all of Al's kids in the front yard of our house a couple of weeks ago now.
Yep.
And y'all were looking at stars, and I think Rebecca had pulled the Starfinder app up.
Yep.
And she turned it and pointed it to the ground, and we see all the stars on the other side of the world. Mm-hmm. And just the moment of, whoa, that's an amazing kind of thought, that there are people on the other side of the world that's what they would be seeing.
If it wasn't daylight.
Yeah, if it wasn't daylight, thank you. Total eclipse. But, so there are positive uses of technology. Let me just go on record as saying that. But I think so much of our life is dominated by it that we need to minimize that and interact. And if by, say, oh, that's a shepherd purse, and to your point, naming, yeah. It's just say, oh, well, that's a tree. Let's identify what kind of tree is. Is that a post oak, water oak, red oak? What are we talking about? Because they all are distinctive.
Yep. And I know you've had that. You've already had your conversation with David Sanders.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite days of the entire year, every single year, the RA does a camp out. The RA group does a camp out at his property. And the Saturday, we spend the night Friday night, and then that Saturday, he always takes the boys on a hike. And we go to a different part of his property every year that I've been. And he is, it takes a long time. It's a long walk. And the kids are getting kind of bored, probably, 2 or 3 hours into it. But, he is still just saying, he's just naming the trees. He's naming the leaves that are on the ground. He's naming the vines that are growing. And so I really appreciate that every single time that we go. And there's so much stuff that I always forget. He tries to give you ways to remember. If you see a leaf that looks like this, you know that it's this. And I'm like, I can't even remember all that.
And that just to give you the commercial, y'all follow up and look for the podcast where I interview David, or listen really to David tell some of his stories. And what you're describing right there, Josh, is a man who has intentionally and intimately interacted with the piece of the land, piece of the world that he lives in. Mm-hmm. And he knows it and can name it. Mm-hmm. And so as he walks through, it's not just this blur.
Yeah.
It is full of the wonders of God right there in front of him. And he's able to see that. That's what I was aiming to help hopefully cultivate through the sermon on Sunday, to take off our shoes, to open our eyes. I used the story of Elisha and Gehazi in 2 Kings 6, a marvelous, wonderful story. Mm-hmm. That spiritual reality was there all the time. Gehazi just couldn't see it. And I think that's the kind of world in which we live, and that so many people are just blind to.
Yeah.
And I maybe introduced you to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and that, talk about that in a moment. Any reaction to that?
The poem itself was interesting, but the part that she pulls out that's in your office that Kristen created, now you can put
Earth's crammed with the grandeur of God.
Yeah, you sit back and you ponder that, and you really see how his goodness is in everything. He created it for us to enjoy. It's here for a reason. It's not just to tell us the time of day. It's not just to tell us the different seasons, even though that's part of it. But we can enjoy what he created. We get to look at it in amazement, because that's not something that we created. That is not something that we could ever recreate. But it is his intentional goodness and just being able to look at things in a different way. The world is crammed with all of those amazing things that we take for granted every day.
Yeah, and the rest of that quote is, and those who don't see it just pick blackberries and daub their faces with it unaware.
Yeah.
You know, I want to wake up. I want that David Sanders point of view to the world in which I live. Everything I see, man, I see God's hand, God's glory in that.
But the day it clicks that all of this is for us to enjoy is when you see his creation in everything.
Yeah.
It is not just the stars, but it's also the different blades of grass that are growing. I mean, it's the different types of bees that are pollinating flowers. It's everything.
One of the blogs that I read, there's a really good blog on birds, and he's a Christian.
Y'all are all about some birds.
That's kind of mine and my wife's thing.
Yeah, it's sometimes birds. Just those of you who listen who are part of our church family or in our community, sometimes stop Rebecca Watford and just ask her about the birds she's seen. You will have a joyful nerd out moment. It's beautiful. It absolutely is.
If you want to get her riled up, just tell her you saw a painted bunting.
Oh, there you go. That's right.
In your backyard the day before, and she would just freak out because that's kind of her holy grail of wanting to see
We've actually
birds.
seen one of those at my house.
Yeah, I know. So, I mean, they're around here, but we have not seen them at our house or anywhere else.
Rare bird sightings.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, just a marvel.
Okay, so here's where I was going with that. One of his blogs, and I might shoot this to Casey.
Put it on the show notes. Yeah.
But he had a blog on warblers, and he called it the superfluous beauty.
Yeah, I remember this. You shared that with me.
Of warblers.
Yeah, go read it, folks.
And basically what he's talking about is the beauty of these birds serve no purpose other than to display the glory of God. Like, evolutionists could try to come up with some sort of, well, it was this color because of this and this and that, but it's seemingly purposeless.
Yeah.
In any logical sense.
And I wonder how many people hear them but never hear them. There's a story, and I don't know if it's just illustrative or if it has its roots in fact, but story of a country bumpkin who had gone to the big city, and they're walking down this busy street with his friend from the city that's showing him all the sights and all that and wonders. And the man stops in the midst of this busy street and he says, "Can you hear that?" And the person said, "What do you mean? Do you hear that cricket?" And the person couldn't hear it. And the man walks right over to the place and finds it and says, "Yeah, there it is. There's the cricket." And his friend says, "How in the world did you hear that?" I said, "Because that's what I am tuned to hear."
Yep.
And I think in the noise of our social media saturated world, 24/7 news cycle, all of the noise of our world that's constantly vying for our attention, I think we miss the voice of God, that still small voice. And it may not really be all that small because, as Psalm 19:1 says, all creation is singing. We're just not listening.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point you were making for out of Psalm 19:1 is just the heavens and the earth and everything declares the glory of God.
Yeah.
And Casey, that was what you were bringing up about the poem as well. We can have our eyes and our ears and our feet closed off to those things if we choose to do so. But God has invited us into His magnificent world, His majesty in all the earth, in Psalm 8:1. There's
I think
so much.
There is, and I think
of
God's word to Isaiah, and John picks this up. That I played the song for you, but you wouldn't dance. And I just think of God's got this beautiful symphony for us that's going on.
The trees dance.
Yeah, they do. Man, one of my favorite quotes from Marilyn Robinson. I think I told you one time if Marilyn Robinson wrote a phone book, I think I'd read it. But it's out of the novel Home. It's out of the series anyway. It's my favorite of them. But in the opening paragraphs, she describes the oak tree that was in front of the old home place. And she tells of her dad saying that if we could see this oak tree in geologic time, we would see it leaping and twisting and dancing for joy. And that's a terrible paraphrase of the quote, but it was just a beautiful click of the switch for me to realize, man, yeah, that's exactly what's happening.
Absolutely.
And we don't see it because we don't take the time. We're not patient enough. And that's another thing I think particularly of our culture. And if you ever have opportunity to travel to other cultures or maybe even to small town, that's one of the appeals of small town is the quote unquote small or the slower lifestyle. We do have an opportunity. I will say it's slow, but there's a way that it's busier than it is even in a large community. That's another conversation for another day. But there's an appeal to that because so much of the other things that demand our attention maybe are not as demanding in some of those circumstances, and we can take time. I contend that all of us, regardless of whether we live in an urban or rural environment, or whether we're in a high pressure, job situation, or if we're retired and living at ease, I think we all can intentionally engage with God's creation in order to hear it. And I think, in fact, we're supposed to. So.
Yeah, and so your final point for your sermon was talking about look to the lilies and the birds, flowers and the birds. And speaking of my wife and me and birds, we have 2 wrens that are trying their darndest to build a nest in our Telluride Kia, right there where the windshield wipers are. We'll be doing dishes and we'll see them flying in and out of there. And we go out there, we pull all the junk out of there. This morning, I saw them going in and out of there. I went outside, pulled all the junk out of there. Within an hour, Rebecca left and went to work, and when she got in the Kia and started down the road, stuff just started flying out. She's like, they've created this whole nest in here. And so when we're looking to the birds of the air for wisdom and God's provision, apparently God's wanted to provide them a home in our Kia, but we're not wanting that. But there's
all right, I'm going to check back in with you in a week and a half or so and see what life lessons you've learned from this.
I know, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out the life lesson for this particular one. Obviously there's still that provision there, but we keep every time I'm trying to save your babies. That's what I'm trying to do, because if you build a nest in my car, they will die, or we would try to relocate them. But I'm trying to figure out the wisdom that I need to learn from those particular wrens, because right now they're just not getting it.
Sometimes people are stupid. Maybe I don't know.
There you go.
I don't know. But that's a beautiful thing that Jesus tells us. If we want to learn from Jesus, Jesus says, if you want to learn from me, go let the birds and the flowers be your professors. Whew. There's a whole different school to go to.
And there's some. I think the principle stands with so many things. You think in Proverbs it says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard." Mm-hmm. I can't remember the rest of them. That's the only one that stuck. And so, oftentimes when I look at an ant, I think of how God has created me and what He desires from me. And so, it's not just. I don't think it is just flowers and birds or ants, but it's how God has created all things, and the wisdom that we can learn from those things. And it's different than sitting down and reading Scripture. And so our takeaways from those things could be wrong, right?
But isn't it instructive, I think, back to the earlier comment about this division? Because when we read Scripture, we think, okay, this is special, holy. But how often Scripture points us back to an ant, or the birds, or the flower, or things associated, the trees that clap their hands. I think that is an instructive moment for us, and it helps us to restructure, hopefully, how we approach the world. And kudos to you, Casey, for getting your daughter out to lay on the ground and look at stars. What a great thing that you are building into her in these early years a sense of there's something wonderful to see here. Have there been any moments where she goes, wow?
Yeah, we laid out in the yard a week ago. I guess it was the Saturday after we were at y'all's house, and Rebecca gave me a kind of a short lesson on the constellations, and we laid out in the yard in the open just trying to see what we could see. And she laid there, and I was like, well, there's Orion. We see the 3 stars that are very close together. That's his belt. And she said, his belt? And so now she is able to actually point that one out. If she sees the stars, she tells me that's Orion.
And she's how old?
3.
And you were how old when you figured out that's what that is?
29.
You've given her a great head start.
Yeah, I want her to enjoy the outdoors because that's what it was given to us for.
Mm-hmm.
As much as we can get from it, as far as like cultivating with food and different things like that, it also gives back to us in different ways of enjoyment with just being in awe of God and his continual goodness in our lives just through what he's done for us in creation.
Yeah. Yeah. And boy, I tell you, I don't know what the weather will be like when you hear this podcast, but today is, I've already had 2 phone calls from 2 different people in the life of our church, and the very first words before I could even say hello is, isn't this an awesome day? It is a great day to be out and enjoy God's creation. But every day, even in those sweltering hot August days or those frigid north wind raw days, there's beauty and wonder to be found in all of those moments.
Yes.
And the recognition that this is God. I'm so grateful for Norman Wearsb's quote that just has really owned me as I've done preparation for this. But that all of creation is God's love made audible, tactile, delectable. I'm getting them all out of order, but taste, touch, see. It's as the psalmist says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." And we can do that every time we step outside our door.
Yep. So let's go outside.
Hey, I'm for it. Let's go.
Can we have class outside?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's have class outside today.
I hope you're listening to this in a hammock or something.
Right, there you go.
So, well, y'all, is there anything, last thoughts?
Man, y'all check the show notes because we'll put some additional resources there for you. And be looking for these other podcasts. And please share them with other folks. We appreciate y'all taking some time to visit with us this week.
All right, see you next time.